Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a thriller comedy directed by Helena Regine and released in August of 2022. Its structure reminds us of Clue, or of those bottled mysteries where victims die in a setting without any outside influence. In the case of Bodies, 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 several young Gen Z adults gather at a posh northeastern home to party during a hurricane. Along the way, we learn not only of these characters' antagonisms towards each other, but how that might be used as motive for something far more sinister. Taking place over the course of one night, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a fun and entertaining popcorn flick that also contains various problems that I think would be interesting to delve into. The thriller is a somewhat coherent film. Several later moments are foreshadowed using long takes on objects or events that allow for some of the best moments to shine in the first half of the film. Sadly, unlike Clue or Knives Out, this foreshadowing strategy does not last throughout the entire film. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies lacks the kind of tactile details that predecessors do to help push characters into new set pieces. There's no collection of evidence besides what is on their phones. There is no motive besides what can be pulled out in dialogue from the characters' heads. As such, while the movie offers raised stakes with each subsequent event, they lack an arc or through line, and are more scenes that simply attach one after another. I would not normally spend so much time comparing, but Bodies clearly borrows from Clue's events. For example, the use of a gun in the third act, suggesting whoever has the gun has got to be the killer, is also in this movie, but handled quickly and awkwardly. One character who is obviously not present for the first body is tracked down with aggression, much like the cook and Yvette the maid were in Clue. Comparing the two films also reveals a distinct lack of exposition among the characters, few as they are, before the bad events begin. We are given only slight details, but unlike Clue, where they are extensive and draw the entire cast together, this group's slapdash gathering ends up being part of the conflict. Much of the opening up and intensifying of these conflicts ends up occurring in only a handful of explicit arguments, one running for far too long, and should have been closer to the beginning of the film or sprinkled out. As such, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies plays out more like Lord of the Flies than Clue, but perhaps without the haunting significance that Lord of the Flies has. And while the entire movie takes place in one location, little attention was paid in giving a viewer an early tour of the house before the action began. I was surprised to find that the house had a basketball court, as just one example. To me, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies has a somewhat coherent through line, but is marred by quite a few choices that inhibit it from being more, so a 2 out of 5 is what I will give it. What Bodies lacks in coherence, it excels as a movie for young people gathered together in a house with popcorn. It provides a tone that is stilted and awkward among the cast, which quickly escalates into anger, aggression, terror, and sometimes hysteria. Much of the glee of the film comes from watching people who generally know substantively little about each other and also of themselves. Much of the fun is spent mocking the cast to great effect. Though the large argument I spoke of earlier is filled with a kind of 2020s buzzword collection, much of the use of these words is spent by the characters in rationalization of real violence, which to me is a wonderfully satirical attack on Gen Z that stands above the film. There are one or two jump scares, but most of the film is spent in a kind of psychological tension between the characters as they uncover more of the antagonisms between each other, which in my mind is a better use of the thriller genre. Unfortunately, unlike other thrilling movies like Black Swan, Bodies lacks a resonance at the end that makes rewatching totally unnecessary. It does not acknowledge some of the deeper meanings of the film, like the fact that Gen Zers are not a particularly embodied generation, having resorted to phones and media over real, genuine human contact, and this might also be a culprit for the events of the story. But Bodies is a fun ride with enough twists to be thrilling, so a 4 out of 5 works here. By the end, Bodies is a thoroughly simple film. It asks questions that it answers specifically. These answers are unfortunately not very revealing. Much of the cinematography, as mentioned before, does not reveal the setting altogether very well, but during these intense moments, the majority of the lighting of the film comes from iPhone flashlights. This darkness robs much of the space of the mise-en-scene of any sort of detail or visual complexity. Even Gen Zers would work to light candles, and in fact young people who are drunk or high might see this as an opportunity. Instead, the movie often is simply one person's face floating in total darkness, which perhaps builds some thrilling tension, but does so at the cost of complexity. Cameras are handheld and follow characters closely, rather than providing any sort of depth with resting cameras at a distance. Several interpersonal conflicts of the film are brought up and used immediately, rather than foreshadowed or, even better, used thematically to add significance. Many of the drama between the characters is rather basic. For example, David, a young man, is intimidated by Greg's masculinity and virility. Greg, played by Lee Pace, is an obviously attractive man, and is a point that the characters also mention explicitly. Not only does the movie feel the need to state outright, rather than show what tensions exist, it also is unable to build a foundation with it for further rewatching or further speculation. Bodies is definitely a movie that is meant to be watched, enjoyed, and forgotten almost immediately. While it might critique Gen Z effectively, it does little else. So a 2 out of 5 will suffice. If we were to attempt to highlight some original aspects of Bodies, we are likely to be disappointed. Mysteries of this sort have been around for a century, and is a model that filmmakers have used to make low-budget indie films to great effect. Like I have mentioned, many of the characters exhibit common problems that play out in common ways, and even some reversals of character traits play off as not too surprising as well. Much of the choices of using phones as lighting, we could say, is original, as oftentimes this nearby light source was a lantern or candle in period pieces, and those make it difficult to create intense action sequences. There is something to be said for the progressive wrecking of the house, similar perhaps to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or the hardly discussed Mouse Hunt, starring Nathan Lane. In my opinion, the movie did not go far enough, because they did not want to actually damage the property. Where perhaps Bodies is most original is in its acerbic attention paid to Gen Z, in a way that I, as a millennial, found very entertaining. Watching the characters shift erratically from virtue signaling to accusatory made the film work much more than it had been simply a thriller. Still, this is a tried and true formula, so once again a 2 out of 5 works here. A 2.5 out of 5 showcases the power of the film as entertainment, but not much more if we were to speculate on it as a capital F film. It's witty, playful, but light, both in subject matter and in significance. For some, Bodies may be a film that is used to help identify generational features for later young people, much like millennials might do by watching the 80s films of the Gen Xers. But besides that, the movie is best experienced with a group, and then dropped for whenever the next one arrives. Bodies is fun, but not filling. Thanks for watching.